But first you have to have some humility to accept that it isn't the actual outcome. The thing you might be desiring, that may not be the thing that is going to fulfill you and give you purpose and meaning. Trust the process and really hold your values at your core, knowing that you will improve.
In addition to seeing humility as being a virtue, I also think it's a tool that can be mobilized strategically.
It's not saying what to think, it's how to think.
Right.
How can you use these virtues and characteristics for your benefit?
You think you know everything about a particular domain or subject, you still need to be able to discard that and let it be for a moment and allow yourself the opportunity to take in what other people have to offer.
I was justifying my fear. I was lacking courage disguised as humility. All right, welcome back everyone to the Transferable Everything podcast. Today's a pretty good conversation for us because we're working on humility today. This is a chapter in the book, very intentionally, and it happens to be one of the virtues that I admire most. And it's very apt because we're recording this on a Monday, and this past Friday we dropped the very first episode. And that in of itself was a pretty incredible act of humility. I've heard a lot of people talk about in the podcast space or the social media space exactly this. And of course, it made sense conceptually to me that it made sense the amount of humility that would be required. However, having gone through the process really opened my eyes to the vulnerability that you have to have.
Sure.
And the humility in order to do that. I sort of likened it to doing something for the very first time, sucking at it. And we all know we're going to suck the very first time we do something. But doing it literally publicly. Not that there's a million people watching each episode.
Sure.
But people are watching.
Yeah, the results are on display.
Yeah. Friends and family, especially people who care for us and so forth. I thought of it like if I'd shared my dream of becoming a professional soccer player to all of my friends and family and then invited them to my very first soccer game, they'd probably think I was nuts.
Right.
Because I would be so terrible on the pitch that they'd be like, oh, this poor boy.
Poor guy.
He has no chance. And it feels similar to how I imagine that scenario going. However, I feel pretty comfortable.
Yeah? Feeling better?
Much better.
Yeah.
Much better. Just because I think, in truly believing in transferable everything, I've seen this exact thing play out so many different times in my life. And so it's a bit of a trust the process kind of thing, even though it's on public display.
Sure.
Trust the process and really hold your values at your core, knowing that you will improve. But just like I talk about my soccer career, we can still do everything right and fail.
Sure.
And so there's some humility in that in of itself, right? We can put in the work. We've studied the best we can, the topics that we're exploring. We're actively trying to get better in speaking, evaluate how we're performing, all of these things, and still we may fail, as I did in my dreams of becoming a professional soccer player.
Sure.
Did everything I think you could probably do right. And still, but the journey becomes
Absolutely, and you need to approach these kinds of things with a practitioner's mindset. It's like a philosophy I take with social media in general, where a lot of people post things to demonstrate that they've done a thing. But my aim is always to do something to do it, not to have done it. So let the work be the work.
Absolutely. And I'm sure this will be an ongoing theme, because at the base of it, it's one of the things that Transferable Everything as a way of thinking is trying to answer. And that's the question of, if it's about the journey and not the outcome, what does that even mean? And what is it about the journey rather than the outcome? But first, you have to have some humility to accept that it isn't the actual outcome. The thing you might be desiring that may not be the thing that is going to fulfill you and give you purpose and meaning.
Sure. There's always a what's next.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, humility has so many layers, and so I'm really excited to kind of peel them apart one by one. One thing I did want to add, though, this is more for everyone listening, is that the book Transferable Everything, as it stands currently, has 20 chapters. We're exploring one chapter at a time, and so I don't know if this is the right way of doing this, but this is kind of the platform that we wanted to, or the strategy we wanted to take on the podcast platform, was just sort of like working through chapter by chapter and inviting you on that journey with us. So we're talking about a broad concept, humility, but there's so much more inside of the book, and there's so much connective tissue between all of the virtues that we'll be exploring that it's impossible to go through all of them. So in saying that, I say there's going to be so many things missed. There's going to be so many things not covered. And to be fair, people much smarter than myself have been exploring humility for a millennia. Yeah. And so it's a very important topic, and it's a very broad one. But there's unfortunately no chance to cover everything. That being said, I did receive feedback, a lot of feedback actually, from the first episode, and I welcome it. That was a really great experience to get some of that feedback. It's going to help inform us to do a better job, to speak more clearly.
Yeah, absolutely.
To direct the things that we want the audience to hear or understand in a more efficient way, a more precise way. And so within that, of course, we have to be humble and
sure.
And not take it to heart, take it as constructive feedback. But I also say that to say to whoever's listening, please, we're open to as much feedback as you can provide us. So anyways. Humility. Let's look at humility as a strength to kind of start.
Okay.
I know you have some questions, so
I have more notes than questions.
Notes? Okay.
Yeah.
So if we can start with humility as a strength.
Okay.
Because it kind of seems counterintuitive, and this is actually something I got some feedback about, because I think we had briefly touched on humility, and in each episode I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of the other chapters.
I'm sure there's going to be a lot of crossover.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I think needs to be abundantly clear is humility is not intended to be sort of this like low self-esteem. It's not intended to be just this passive individual and so forth. It's intended to be from a place of strength and a virtue that contributes towards the strength of your overall character. So just to start, I see it as a strength. We've talked about the bar graph, right? So if we imagine that all of your virtues, characteristics, and attributes were on this infinite bar graph, and let's say the 10 that we have in chapters are changing, but let's say 10, 12 that we have in the book. So we look at courage, the last chapter that we did. If you lack humility if you think you have all of the courage already, like you've won the courage game,
right,
and you lack that humility, then you're inhibited in your ability to get stronger. And courage is required to get stronger, physically and mentally.
Right.
And so without that humility, you're going to inherently lack strength.
Sure, and your growth stagnates.
Right. So I see that as that's one layer of a contributor to humility as it ties into strength. But there's so much more, because you can also attribute strength to outcomes. So your ability to derive an outcome as a leader. Without humility, good luck achieving most outcomes. Because if you can't look at yourself and what you're doing, sort of the extreme ownership type thing, then your ability to achieve outcomes, both individually and as a team, will stagnate, just like your character development. Everything will stagnate without a sufficient amount of humility.
Yeah, and particularly in leadership, you have a responsibility to acknowledge or understand where your strengths are and where your strengths aren't, so you can surround yourself with the people who can make up for those deficiencies, right?
Beautiful. Exactly. And I was actually having this conversation over the weekend, and one of your jobs as a founder, as a leader of a business, is to surround yourself with people who are better than you and smarter than you at particular things that you struggle with, and continue to do that over time. And so, this is why the framework in the book is cyclical, is because you need to keep doing that over and over again. It's not good enough to say, well, these 4 things I'm not the best at as a business leader. And so I have the people around me. Well, if you're working on the business and it's growing, it's developing, you're going to need to continue to add in more and more people in different domains that are better than you.
Sure.
And maybe even replace you. That's, as a leader of a business, especially a founder, that's tough to imagine. But if you truly care about the business, if you truly care about its success and the people within it, you also have to accept that it could come to a point where you're not the right person for the job anymore. Just as you would have to evaluate that of anyone else. Your responsibility is the same of yourself.
Yeah, I think it's also not to say that you wouldn't have the capacities to learn those things yourself either, or develop a certain level of mastery. But as a leader, time is a very valuable thing. So that it's a trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. That's really well put, because it's a strategy. What you do with your time is a strategic decision. And so Dan Martell talks about this in his book, Buy Back Your Time. 80% of your 100 is 100%. So even if you can't find somebody to do 100% of what you maybe could do, it's still better to have somebody at 80%, which is great, of what you could otherwise do. So you can repurpose your time for something that's going to actually push and expand and help grow the business. One of the challenges with that is that if as a leader, that function that we're talking about, where you could find someone at 80%, if you've sort of tied in your identity or your satisfaction or your meaning and purpose into that thing, then it's going to be really hard for you to accept that notion of putting someone in there at 80% of what you could otherwise do.
Sure.
And so within that as well, that brings us back to a sufficient amount of humility that needs to continue to grow and expand for you and your business to continue to grow and expand.
Right. And I like that you mentioned strategy specifically, because in addition to seeing humility as being a virtue, I also think it's a tool that can be mobilized strategically.
Absolutely. And I think with some of these characteristics and virtues, a lot of people see them solely as these altruistic kind of virtues that, well, they're for everyone else but me. But that's not true. Yes, they will serve others, of course. And I think that should be part of it. And there's a chapter in the book about service, leadership, and so forth. But you can look at it as a self-fulfilling thing. You can strategically make the decision to be humble to derive your outcome that you want for yourself. Everyone else still becomes the beneficiary of it.
Sure. I guess what I was getting at is I feel that it's more more akin to a tool than something that somebody can that somebody just has. What I mean by that is to somebody who doesn't know what humility is, if we're talking about it as a virtue, it won't be particularly obvious to them when they're expressing humility or being humble. Or if you can be intent on using it as a tool and using it strategically, it then becomes part of your character because you're applying it properly.
Sure.
If it's unconscious, then maybe you can move into meekness a little more easier than you would otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. And so really what you're describing is the intentionality behind its application.
Yeah. So I'm still working through it myself because I don't typically or haven't viewed humility through this type of like rigorous lens. I'd always thought of it as being humble is simply just a character trait that somebody has. It's how they interface with the world.
Right.
But now that I'm thinking about it more and more as we go through these conversations, I am seeing it as more of a tool that can be used with intent and used strategically. And that you almost need to view it, or I do, rather, through that lens in order for it to become something that can be an inherent trait.
Can you give me a use case?
Yeah. In a bubble, I don't think that somebody can be humble in a purely virtuistic way.
Okay, so...
Because I don't know if there's any purpose to being humble without a strategic application of that humility. It's a good thing, a good trait, without question, to be a humble person, and we can discuss all the reasons why that's a positive thing to have. But if you don't know why you're applying it or how you're applying it, then it can also be a negative thing as well.
Sure. So can we look at this through the lens of differentiating thoughts and action, which I know is a huge struggle for a lot of people, myself included, which is that are we our thoughts or are we our actions? And I would hate for all of us if we were our thoughts.
Right.
Because we have great thoughts and we have poor thoughts.
Sure.
And so if who we were as a person was a reflection of those things, that wouldn't be great. And so I believe that who we are is our actions. So whether you use humility as a tool, it comes more naturally, or you have to completely learn from the ground up how to functionally use it in your day-to-day life. If you do things that demonstrate humility, then you're humble. You're acting as a person with humility. So I think maybe that's true for all of the virtues. Maybe that's true for all of the characteristics. And maybe then that brings us back to the notion of you don't find yourself, you build yourself. Because they're all things like a tool that we can work on.
Yeah. For me, and I think I've said this before, like you need to know and understand what a thing is in order to embody that thing.
Sure.
And then utilize it and mobilize it. And in the case of this conversation, share it with others to help them cultivate it within themselves.
Yes.
So I like the tool approach in that sake because I can't teach somebody a moral virtue. I can't say act this way because it's virtuous.
Right.
And who am I to say that? Where I can say, hey, if these are the things that you might seek to gain by being a more humble person, here's how it'll help you. Here's how it'll help you in specific scenarios, particularly in the case of being successful transferring from domain to domain.
Yeah, I actually really like the way you framed that, because some of the feedback I received pertaining to the first episode that we dropped was sort of differentiating between, are we telling people or are we telling people what to think? Here's the virtues, you should embody these virtues. And that's not exactly what transferable everything is intended to do. It's not saying what to think, it's how to think.
Right.
How can you use these virtues and characteristics for your benefit? So to your point, maybe that's worth exploring even in the writing of referring to them as tools, as a utility towards achieving something, and in a bit of a reframe. And to be fair, because we've used them to build a framework, that means each one within the framework is a tool.
Sure.
It's playing an active role in the filtering mechanism to give us the thing on the other side. And for everyone listening, that's effectively a framework that we've been working on, which allows you to take an experience that you've had, the most mundane or the most extreme experience, and put it through a flowchart where on the other end you have a distilled underlying principle and the essence of whatever knowledge you can extract from that experience. And humility being one of them. And so inside of that framework, maybe it's a tool. Even though sort of paradoxically, it's a virtue in of itself.
Sure. It's certainly virtuous to be a humble person, but in the context of domain transfer, or mobilizing any of these tools for that matter, I think you need to have an understanding of how you're deploying humility in the various situations you find yourself in.
Sure. So let's consider then a definition for humility.
Shoot.
So actually, I don't know that I can give a definition.
How humble of you.
I say that because it looks so different. And yeah, we could give the actual definition, and I think definitions of words are important. But in how we're trying to describe its utility, to give a definition for that, I think it's quite hard. I think the easiest thing to do is to provide use cases. Because if we give a definition, and like you said, it's important to understand, then it's putting it back into sort of this abstract thinking, rather than if we give use cases, we can look at it through the lens as a tool. Because the example that whatever use cases we're giving is utilizing it as a tool, as a function. So for example, if you're a soccer player, if you're a young athlete, and you show up to training and you don't perform that well, or a game you don't perform that well, you might have thought that you did okay, or maybe you even thought you did well, but after the game, after the training session, you have a conversation with your coach and they give you some feedback that is the complete opposite of how you saw yourself perform. So there's a bit of a caveat, and you and I have talked about this caveat, is you have to at least, in the feedback use case, you have to at least trust that the feedback you're getting is coming from a good place, it's honest,
right?
It's probably accurate, at least a little bit. It doesn't have to be entirely accurate. And you have to then experience that moment, and you're gonna have to have enough humility to say, they could be right. I need to think about this a little bit more. Maybe I didn't perform well. The same thing is true with a boss at work. You could get some feedback from a boss that says, hey, this project that you did, you didn't perform as well as we were expecting, and if you don't turn things around, that could cost you your job. Well, you can kind of choose how you want to respond. Now, it's not so simple, and I totally get that, which is why we're trying to work on this. But where you want to be is get to a place where it's the self-awareness, where you can acknowledge that there's this emotion sort of coming up immediately. And it's probably frustration, a bit of anger, disbelief is sort of stirring all of that up. Or you can suspend that and say to yourself, they might be right. I need to dig a little deeper.
Sure.
I need to explore some dark corners. Same thing is true in a relationship with a friend. Same thing is true in a family, with a significant other, with your children. All of those things are functionally the same. And this is the essence of transferable everything. All of those use cases are requiring the exact same thing in order for you to look inward clearly. And that's the utility of humility.
Right. What I have written here, and as you said, there's loads of nuance, so to define humility wholly would be a difficult thing to do. But my definition, working definition as it stands, is it's to understand or to be understanding of and appreciative of the complexity of reality. Knowing how many different outcomes could possibly exist, knowing the complexity of life as it stands, how much information there is, how much I can possibly absorb or understand myself, how I might need to reach out to others for a helping hand, and so forth. I'm not going to be able to understand the universe by myself.
Sure. And then you shrink that down into those use cases.
Sure.
No,
at its core, if I don't understand or appreciate the complexities of life, then very quickly confidence turns to arrogance and so forth.
Yeah. And even when you learn a little bit more and you feel like you're closer to a total understanding of a thing, having the humility to understand that there's more complexity.
Sure.
And so I think that's a really great definition.
Well, it's if we go back to and I say this so often, but moving between domains and being successful in doing so, you can think about the teacup proverb, if you're familiar. The student goes to the teacher, and he's asking all of these questions and already has all of his own answers. And comparison is drawn to a teacup that's already full. So the teacher starts pouring tea, his wisdom, his knowledge, etc., into the cup, but the cup is overflowing. The teacher can't provide the student with anything because their cup is already full.
Right.
And so the student must first empty their cup. So even if you have a full cup, you think you know everything about a particular domain or subject, you still need to be able to discard that and let it be for a moment and allow yourself the opportunity to take in what other people have to offer.
So if I pull this back to what you said a moment ago about humility being a tool, I think that's a great metaphor for where it could be a tool. Because what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve is objectivity, at least is the way I understand that metaphor. That student is trying to, in the domain where they have a bunch of knowledge, they need to suspend that knowledge in order for them to be to objectively look at everything that professor is teaching them. But if they have all of that knowledge baked already there, then like you said, it's going to overflow. They need the room.
Sure.
And if you want to be an objective thinker, you need to sort of almost remove yourself and your way of thinking from the thing and allow the space to intake that the new amount of knowledge and then start to sit with it and think through it without the bias of whatever you held previously.
Sure.
So if the goal is objectivity in that case, then humility is a tool to achieve that in the same way that you described it. So
absolutely.
I do really like it as a utility.
Yeah. So in that case, I mean, should the student decide to empty their cup, they're making a decision at a vector where they basically have two choices, which is to choose ignorance or choose the pursuit of knowledge and growth.
Right. And to continue to make things cyclical, that's where it brings us back to the very first chapter, which is basically vision, agency, choice. So you first have to decide what the outcome is that you want to achieve.
Right.
Exactly as you described it. And then it becomes a tool towards that.
So when I was working through this, I was able to name a different set of not definitions or maybe like types of humility. kinds of humility. And the one that I was just describing is also a tool-based version, which is humility as an epistemic tool, with epistemic meaning relating to knowledge, what we know, how we know it, and the justification for our beliefs, effectively. So what I wrote down here with respect to that decision vector, the cup proverb situation, was that you have a choice between ignorance or the pursuit of knowledge, and you need to have a level of humility to discard and then refill. And obviously, I feel that we should be encouraging the pursuit of knowledge and not ignorance. I'm a huge proponent of that.
Yes.
And obviously, by proxy, a huge proponent of humility. But I noted that there's another decision vector that comes up that also requires humility, which is that you need to make the decision as to whether or not you need to know something. If you feel it's important, going back to the leadership conversation, where is it at that point of decision making, is it important for you to decide that you personally need to learn that thing, or do you have to find somebody else to do that? So using that as an example, as well as the idea of how do we choose our mentors? There's a level of humility that goes into obviously accepting that you don't know what you don't know, and looking to somebody else who can provide that. But I feel like it's got to be a top-down thing as well from those mentors, because they have to do the same thing. Otherwise, it becomes a matter of the blind leading the blind.
Absolutely. And downstream of the framework, and when we get into leadership, that's a really important topic, because if we look at it through the lens of ourself becoming a leader, if we don't have sufficient development in these characteristics and virtues, how could we lead anybody? And so that's kind of important. Now, if we look at that then through who are we looking for as leaders, we need to be able to evaluate others, analyze their actions, and then decide which of those actions align with who we want to become.
Sure.
And the other part of that, and I think we talked about this previously, is that you don't have to pick a person in their entirety. You don't have to have mentors in their entirety. The same thing is true. I talk to a lot of people about this with your parents, right? We expect our parents to be all things, perfect in all ways, even though we aren't, and even for those of us that recognize that. And so, when I talk about especially the older parent-child relationship, I suggest that the best thing you can do is love your parents for who they are, not who you wish they were. And as you start to understand who they are, because you're evaluating them, you've seen their actions up close, you can also gauge the things that they're very good at. And so they can become your mentor in that way. They don't have to be your mentor at everything. No mentor can be your mentor for everything. So for example, if in your parent-child relationship, one of your parents is really good at money management. Well, as you get older, it's probably good to talk to that parent about money management. Yeah. And maybe the other one has really great emotional intelligence, and you're having a bit of a dynamic in a relationship. Probably consult that one. And so you start to get better at learning who to go to for what, because they have a level that you aspire to achieve in whatever that virtue might be, that level of intelligence, skill mastery, it doesn't matter. And that's critically important. So you're kind of doing two concurrent things. And I think that's why it does start with that, is you're looking to who are those people, and then from figuring out who are those people, those mentors that I can have in my life, it's then, okay, now let me extract of those things, who do I want to become? And then you start working towards that with a bit of a North Star, each of them demonstrating those things day in and day out for you.
I want to talk about another version that I identified, which is one that anybody has encountered anybody ever could surely pick this out of somewhere and identify it and name it, which is humility as a safety mechanism in that it's humility as a means to keep your ego in check. Of course, we want people to be confident. Confidence is key, but there needs to be a level of humility to make sure it's not misplaced or that it's actually grounded. Overconfidence is not a very desirable thing to have because people either make poor decisions or they have an attitude that it's a pervasive thing, that it can sour a team relationship or an office relationship or what have you. It's not a very good thing. But I just want to pick your brain on your thoughts about the whole ego control standpoint.
So basically, this is ego as the enemy.
Sure.
Okay, so I think this is a really important one because this is one that I've struggled with on both sides of the equation. So on one side, there's a tension with this idea between like true high performers, especially ones that achieve outcomes, and the idea in of itself. It's this very tight rope that you kind of walk. And so it's really hard to navigate, I think. And so, if we use sort of like the best example, which would be Cristiano Ronaldo, he's often been confused as somebody who's completely arrogant and has no humility. But I would argue, if you used my bar graph, that in of itself, for him to become as good as he has to have humility. So that's exhibit A for me. I don't think you can develop the amount of skill that he has without being humble, because he had to know that there's more work to be done. Now, what we do see is that or what we are calling arrogance, is the self-belief that he has. And that's where the tension really exists, in my opinion. Especially being in the position that he's in, where in that position, you're being criticized all the time. From the media, from the fans, from coaching staff, especially in his younger years, from teammates, especially in the professional world, soccer I can speak to. Like, even though you have like a really great team dynamic, at the professional level, they're fighting each other for places on the pitch. They're criticizing each other every day in training. And that's the teammates, let alone your coaching staff, the managers. Everybody is looking at every single detail of every single thing you do. And so when you receive that much criticism, feedback, all of the above, you have to have enough self-belief in order to sort of transcend that. But that's where the tension is. You have to have the humility to say, okay, I have more to work on. They might be right. And also believe in yourself that as long as I do the work, I'm going to get there. And I think the way a lot of people see it is that you have the humility to say, okay, I'm not good enough. And it sort of ends there. And this is sort of like the example at the very beginning where for us is that soccer example on display.
Yeah.
Nowhere near good enough. And I think we're both humble enough to know that. However, we also have enough self-belief that we can become good enough.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And so we wrestle with that tension in this tiny microcosm. You have someone like Cristiano Ronaldo on the upper echelon, and ego becomes the enemy when you can't take that feedback and you say, well, I'm good enough. I don't care what you have to say. And to be honest, 10 years ago, he probably could have done that. He was still the best in the world. If a coach gave him feedback on scoring, and he's on track to be he is history's greatest goal scorer, but he's gonna hit 1,000 goals, a number that no one thought was possible. Well, like, if you're a coach going in there, you're like, what am I gonna teach him?
Right.
But as far as I understand it, he's willing to continue to learn. What am I doing different? Additionally, I think he's just a great example for this, because when he was at Manchester United, he was playing on the right wing, a bit more of a traditional right winger, but he started cutting in. The game was evolving at this time. And then he went to Real Madrid and he became a number 9. Very different position. He became a striker. How much you have to change your game and everything you do to pivot from being this wide player cutting in to this focal point, sort of centralized on the pitch with different dynamics of holding on to the ball and working with your back to goal rather than attacking the net. Like there's all these things that you have to change. And so even when he's at his best, he's won the Ballon d'Or, World Player of the Year, and still he's saying, okay, I can change, I can grow, I can move.
Right.
And so, but he would have been absolutely within his rights to be like, I'm the best. So what can you teach me? You keep telling me I can do more? I don't think so. I think that I'm doing more than enough.
Right.
And so he's maintained that tension.
But then also there's there's obviously a part of him that knows he's being looked up to. He's this football superstar. So like in being humble, he's got so much more to give to his fans as well. If you're as capable as him and you're winning all the time, you need to be able to ask why and then answer that question. Otherwise, everybody's just going to assume your greatness is simply a divine gift.
Right.
But then if you can embody it and demonstrate it and teach others how to do the same thing, no one is going to be Cristiano Ronaldo.
Yeah.
But they can live a much more fulfilling life asking why and identifying how they won and repeating that and continuing to win.
Right. And so I think for the enemy portion, like, how do you see this? How do you see where the ego can become the enemy for not just a Cristiano Ronaldo, but for a person that's, waking up, working their job, maybe trying to get a little bit better,
Sure.
maybe trying to get a promotion. Where do you think ego becomes their enemy?
It's similar to what I just said about Ronaldo in that if you're a capable person, if somebody asks if you're capable and you can give that a resounding yes, I am, then you have a responsibility to check your ego and keep your arrogance in check. If you don't, you're going to be making decisions that aren't necessarily grounded in reality. If you can't identify why you're making wins or making successes and so forth, maybe you continue to do something that's not actually positive and not really, it's actually counterintuitive or counterproductive rather. So where that lands for me is simply like if I think I'm the top guy and whatever I'm doing, I have no ability to check myself whatsoever or no desire to grow beyond what I think I can offer myself, then I'm going to stagnate or I'm going to make incorrect decisions that affect other people downstream.
Right. So there's a bit of awareness that's required in that analysis.
Yeah, but particularly if you work within a team environment or if you're a leader such as yourself, there's going to be downstream consequences or additional dominoes that fall anytime you make a decision or put a new initiative forward.
Yeah.
If you're not doing so from a place of humility, if ego and arrogance are overriding everything, you're not making the right decision at all times.
Sure.
You might make the right decision sometimes.
Sure.
I think you can be a perfectly capable person in one sphere and be arrogant and still make the correct decisions because of how capable you are in this area. But as soon as you bring multiple domains into the conversation, that starts to fall to the wayside.
Yeah. Now, so what I was describing in the Ronaldo case, he had that self-belief. I heard, I want to say it was Eric Weinstein on Modern Wisdom. This was a number of years ago. He had said something. It was actually in relation to Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy, which is a book that I love. And he hit on the nose something that I had actually been struggling with after having read it. And that's sort of what I was saying earlier, just like, I'm really evaluating where I am and realizing like, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough here. I'm not good enough there. And that can be this downward spiral. Truly. And so there's the good and bad side to humility. And I felt this downward momentum. I was just analyzing everything about myself and feeling not sufficient in every domain. And what he had said on this podcast was that what's missed is having enough audacity and in your self-belief to say, okay, I might not be good enough today, but I'm the right person for the job, and I will become good enough to do that.
So I don't even think you need audacity to do that. I think that's a very grounded take.
Okay.
If I have a goal and I really want something, and I can recognize that I'm not there yet, then again, I have my decision vector.
Right.
I can either start to compound my knowledge and experience within that thing until I'm where I want to be, or I can just choose to ignore it. I don't think that's an audacious thing to do.
Okay. But let's say it's something, and maybe this is where using the Ronaldo example again is important. For any single person to say that I'm going to become the best player in the world, that has to be a bit of an audacious leap at 18 years old.
Sure.
So maybe to your point, maybe in smaller
Yeah, I
things.
mean, maybe mine is more grounded in that I know I'm not going to be the top footballer ever. I knew that when I was 18. I know that now.
Sure.
So my goals have not necessarily been so grand.
Right.
But on a micro level, if there's something I want to get good at and I'm not good at that thing now, I know that I have no other option but to work on being good at that thing. And I also need to understand that the work alone is not going to make me good at that thing either.
Right.
There's still a possibility that I'll fail.
Yes, of course. So when you think about that, do you see a ceiling for something?
In some cases, sure. I feel like maybe there are some things that are well out of reach for me. But that could very well be just an understanding that there are certain lengths that I'm not willing to go to reach that thing. So I've already written it off as not being a goal that I would pursue.
Okay. So
like I'm not going to be the first astronaut to walk on Mars, for example.
Sure.
That would be an audacious claim. That's extremely aspirational.
So this is a little bit of sort of separating the wheat from the chaff kind of idea, if you will. Before you start to deploy humility as a tool, you've already done the separating of like what's really possible and what do I also care about, and what do I care about but isn't possible or I don't care about, kind of tuck that away. Maybe that's something worth exploring in the book.
Could be.
As an added chapter of how to do that with like a lot of introspection, a lot of honesty, and yeah, it's something that might be worth exploring.
Before we started rolling, there was something I flagged with you that I wanted to bring up.
Yes.
And I think it kind of has the same repeating loop.
Okay.
That can apply to what you've just brought up.
Okay.
So like a level of humility is required to ground yourself and help inform the things that you think are in reach or not in reach.
Yeah.
And then pursue that. What I was looking at or thinking about was forgiveness. Tied into self-reflection, but also humbly knowing that maybe I need to reflect. As a more developed person today, I can be humble in a way where I can evaluate myself. I know what I have, I know what I don't have, what I need to work on, maybe the things I don't want to work on, even though I know I'm not particularly good at them. There's a value decision being made. But I can forgive myself now for my shortcomings. There's lots of stuff from the past that have eaten me up or bothered me, where I maybe acted out of pocket, or I didn't chase a goal that I maybe should have because it was in reach, but there was a meekness, not a humility. But if I can humbly accept that I don't have all of the tools or all of the answers now, then I need to accept that the past version of myself also didn't have those tools. So I need to accept and forgive that person as well.
Beautiful.
So there's a recurring feedback loop wherein I need the humility to do it, and it makes me even more humble, allowing myself to forgive and forget all of that.
That's beautiful. And forgiveness of oneself is such an important part. There is a chapter in the book on forgiveness for this exact reason. Like you, and I think like almost everybody, I've struggled with that as well. And what you described is, I think, one of the largest challenges, which is for us to objectively evaluate ourselves in that moment. And that's where empathy comes in. And I think like actual empathy of our former self, right? We often talk about empathy as empathy for one another, but it's also empathizing with our former self to understand that, okay, I'm here today because of experiences, new knowledge, wisdom, a more clear way of thinking. That could be that could have been contributed from some of the mistakes that I might have made and understanding my way through them. It could come from a complete awakening in how I look at the world, how I care for my body, my nutrition. There's so many things that contribute to that. And unfortunately, we often apply our today's knowledge that we have with our decisions from 5, 10, 15 years ago, however far back you want to take that. But that's always going to be a recurring theme. So it's almost this audacity in a way of when we think that way of who we are today, as if the version of us 3 years from now isn't going to look at today's version with that same, through that same lens of sort of dissatisfaction, shame, whatever the thing is we do today.
And to be fair, I can only hope that in 3 years I can look back at myself with that same critical lens and still be humble and forgiving and be able to grow from that reflection.
And so you would make the case that it's a good thing.
Sure.
Because if you didn't look backwards in that way, then it probably means you haven't grown enough. You haven't learned enough. And so yes, you might have to deploy forgiveness as a tool. And that's why I like this framing that you've included now. You might have to deploy forgiveness as a tool, and that might be an inconvenience, or it might be difficult and challenging. And I wouldn't take any of that away. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be challenging, but it's necessary, one. And two, it's going to continue to happen. Again, this is why the framework is cyclical. And to your point, hopefully you look back at that, and there's a beautiful component to that, I think. And so we should almost smile at that notion that will likely look back and
sure. I'd hate to think that this is my end state.
Right.
So I wanted to pull us back to a piece where you were speaking of humility being expressed in a negative way. Okay. And that is one of the things that I also identified while I was working through this. I'll read it as I have it written, and you can tell me if this is similar to what you've experienced or the way you had deployed it in a negative way. So I have certainly fallen victim to this myself, which is humility expressed as a fear-based response, in that humility is used as a crutch for identity protection. You've said, like, if we're not our thoughts, we're our actions. If I think internally I'm being humble, but my actions come across as meekness, then I'm not a humble person.
Right.
And then I'm utilizing a tool incorrectly. So what I'd written down is, there's some scenarios where you can genuinely be a humble person, But if you're deploying it as a fear-based mechanism to protect yourself in a new environment, or we can even talk about this podcast, maybe a bit of censorship rather, because your identity is being plastered. You're way more exposed. Your ideas are being criticized. Maybe you have a little golden nugget of wisdom in there that you're not quite ready to share, et cetera, et cetera. So if it can be interpreted as wisdom in some degrees, like oftentimes being silent can denote thought. However, if it's deployed as a means to preserve your identity, you're not really owning your decisions or your ideas. And to that point, if you don't claim an idea, you can't lose that idea. Anyway, I'll kick that back to you. Because I think it's important that we do identify, particularly in the frame of humility being a tool, the right ways to use it and the ways you shouldn't be using it, if you can recognize how you're doing those things.
So it's hard to recognize.
100%.
A reason being, and that's why this, we could talk about this for forever, because there are so many layers that you have to peel back. Okay. So, and this is actually going to lead me to a bit of an outcome for humility in practice as a tool. But
Gotcha.
This podcast, the book Transferable Everything, is probably the best example. So I had been thinking about Transferable Everything as an idea for about 15 years. Now, I knew that, I think it was 15 years ago now, but I did spend some time in my life speaking publicly for some nonprofits and for myself, and that was a fun experience. It was a very informative experience, but I knew that even though I had some decent ideas, I was young, and it was probably worthwhile for me to continue to develop my character and my experiences, and to pursue something beyond soccer, because this was just after I stopped playing or pursuing it at a professional level. And so I did, and that was great. So there was a little bit of humility that was applied there. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, wanting to do this podcast, wanting to start writing the book finally, Transferable Everything. At this time, it's over a decade that I've been thinking about this. And it began with the idea, and then all of a sudden, what you're describing as meekness showed up. I thought it was humility, and that was my cognitive dissonance. And so I think that's a really important word. Cognitive dissonance is sort of it's self-justification, right? So I was justifying my meekness, my fear. I was lacking courage, disguised as humility. Because who am I? You and I have actually had those conversations on that journey, so you know this well.
Yeah.
And I wrestled with that for a very, very long period of time. I wrestled with who am I to say any of these things? And although I still believe that, and I don't believe that, I'm the one that someone should follow kind of thing, that's the furthest thing from the truth. I've just been so fortunate, and so I'm grateful to have had these experiences where I've learned these things. And so all I want to do is offer them up as maybe this can help somebody. Here's what I've learned. This made sense to me.
Right.
Maybe that can help. But it was that fear and meekness truly disguised as those things. And I can only say that now. In those moments, I didn't quite see it. Even though I talked about it, and again, you were on the front line hearing me wrestle through these things for a number of years. And so I'm fortunate, and this is a bit of a strategic part of virtues and characteristics, is surrounding yourself and creating an environment of people that you can talk to, like you and I spoke, people you can trust, and people who are kind of on the journey with you and helping you grow and develop your characteristics. And so building that environment for me meant that I hired a coach.
Right.
This is one of those things that, a lot of, I think, even though the coaching world on the business side has become it's become a bit saturated and a bit cliche, and there's some not great characters that have stepped into the space, and all of those things are true. But the idea that any of us don't need a coach, again, Cristiano Ronaldo has a coach. Who the hell am I to think that I don't need a coach for virtually anything? And one of the values of having a coach, just like as an athlete, is they can look at the smallest of details and they can help show you something that you just can't see for yourself. And so even with these virtues, even with these characteristics, even if you wanted to subscribe to Transferable Everything as something that you're going to try and follow and use the framework and so forth, in addition to all of that, you still need somebody to help guide you and someone to analyze the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
Because we can all trick ourselves. And you have to be humble enough to know that. Now, it does become challenging, even if you have sufficient humility, to separate, again, the wheat from the chaff. And is this humility or is this cognitive dissonance? Which one is it? It's really, really hard. And that's where you need help. That's where you need support.
Yeah, I was just going to say to that point, brings me back to my favorite buzzword of the series so far, which is that humility needs to be intentional.
Yes.
Humility without the ability to assert it is an abdication.
Yeah, you're right. I think, so the intentionality behind humility in everything we do within ourselves is critical. So, but I think that's one of the things that, again, this is probably why I'd really like this tool idea, is because I can intentionally deploy humility and still continuously fall short in the application of it, because that's like, I can shoot a soccer ball, but I'm not going to get better without someone helping me.
Right.
And coaching me and analyzing and so forth. So I think also intentionally building an environment completely designed to support your intentional deployment of that thing.
Yeah.
And there's those layers.
And it's a funny thing because you still need, you need to be humble in your application of humility.
Yeah.
If you catch me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A little ironic.
Yeah, there's still like a loop and a bit of feedback.
Yeah.
Where that's why I like the idea of it as a tool rather than a virtue, because you can espouse it as being something, a virtue that you have. But if you don't fully have it, you can't really analyze whether or not you're applying it.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. My thought process went to absolute garbage. My stomach just went crazy.
That's okay. So we've talked a lot about different variations of humility, and in the book, anyways, we talk about we talk about a ton of variations where you deploy it as a professional, as a parent, as an athlete, all of these spaces, and we've already kind of talked about that internal humility. But I think there's the next layer, and we talked about this on the courage side, is that inner citadel. That sort of like fortress inside of us. And that's where humility becomes really challenging, just like courage does. Because humility allows us to see things clearly. And that's why we need the courage to be willing to do that and then to see it. And, I think it's probably, as a tool, it becomes easier to do that at surface level things deployed in your job, in your interactions with your boss or your coach, like I was describing earlier.
Yeah.
But then it gets really hard inside of yourself. And that's probably where, if we tie it back to forgiveness that you were talking about, that's where it gets really hard, because you start exploring that inner citadel and you start to find things that you don't like about yourself. But you have to be humble enough to know, one, that those will exist, and then recognize that, that's true for all of us. And that's why it's more important to see ourselves as our actions and not our thoughts. Because we all have thoughts. We need to divorce ourselves in a way from those thoughts. Conversely, that also allows us to kind of remove ourselves and analyze ourselves, which is sort of a bit of, downstream to all of this, the end game of a bit of a metacognition of what we want to achieve.
Yeah, the idea of the observer.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. But humility is one of the tools on that journey to ultimately achieve that. And when you're observing things, you need to redeploy the tools, because then you're finding things that you might not like. And, especially where you look at something that didn't go right in your life, a relationship that deteriorated, a job you lost. And for so many of us, we want to look at everyone else. They did this to me. This happened to me. And even in cases where that might be true, with humility, you can then look at and analyze the things that you might have contributed towards the erosion of that relationship, that job that you lost, or whatever the case may be. And then we tie into, that becomes then extreme ownership and all of those things that Jocko talks about,
right,
which is so beautiful. But without a sufficient amount of that humility.
Sure. I think it's also worth noting that you need to have the humility to accept the conditions of your existence when it comes to something like that. If you're looking backwards, do I have the power to repair this or to change it now? And if I don't, and you need to have a sufficient level of humility to understand what tools or ability you have to repair that kind of thing, then you also need to quickly discard it as well and move on from that.
Sure. We can look to athletes for something like this. Again, transferable everything. So I was having a conversation on the way here with my brother. He's a goalkeeper, right? Brilliant goalkeeper. And that's something that's a little bit different from my experience as an outfield player, although a defender and a goalkeeper. They're a little bit more like a tennis player in a particular sense, where like as a defender, if I make a mistake, there's a couple players still left, including the goalie, that, they can come in and support me. So not every mistake I make is kind of like binary, like goal, no goal. However, for a goalie, it often is the case. And so they have to develop this particular mindset, just like a tennis player, where you lose a point, okay, it's gone.
Yeah, go next.
Yeah, that's right. Goalkeeper's the same. And I didn't quite understand it until, trying to think and empathize with what he goes through. And it was, very different from my experience, like I said. And thankfully he has it in abundance. He has a really great mentality. So that's, I'm very thankful for that for him. But that's something that we have to do in our day-to-day life as well.
Yep. Is
we have to be able to experience the thing, deploy humility to figure out what went wrong, forgive ourselves for that thing, and then move on. Goalkeepers, tennis players, they just get good at doing it very quickly.
Right.
Much quicker than I.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're dwelling on it, and you're crowding your mind and so forth, like, yeah, that one goal is going to turn into 2, 3, and so on.
Very, very quickly. And, this kind of brings us back to where part of Transferable Everything actually began, is that if we look at soccer players again, and we'll analyze my brother for this, as a goalkeeper, there's so many technical skills that he has to develop. he needs to work on his first touch, his ball control, ball mastery, his distribution, his involvement in the game as a supporting mechanism for defenders, his soccer IQ and seeing the pitch. And that's where we put most of our time and attention. And all of that can be great. But if he can't learn that humility and forgiveness in a second, then all of that's for nothing.
Right.
And so what we tend to forget is how important these characteristics are as tools in your toolbox, and that can be developed. And we so often lack the intentional development of those tools. And just as it's true for athletes, I think it's true for ourselves. And for me, building my environment, that's where it made sense for me to have a coach. Somebody that I'm intentional about this. I want to develop these characteristics. I need help.
Right.
I need someone who can point it out. Just like on the mechanical, technical side, I need somebody analyzing my ball control.
Sure.
So they can see the smallest tweaks that can be made. Those make the biggest difference.
Yeah. So I'm sure some coaching methodologies are a little different. I don't have a ton of experience in sport, as you know, like especially not at the level that you're used to playing. For you, when you were on the pitch, were you analyzing in real time, like trying to thinking about mistakes you made or what you could have done different? Or are you kind of humbly giving that up, that analysis to your coach so you can focus on the moment of the game itself?
Yeah, good question. Immediately, I would analyze what happened. Now, fortunately, you might have 30 seconds from the time it happens, especially if it led to a goal, and before the restart of the game. But where I failed often is I would hold on to that for so long, maybe until the next training session.
Jeez.
Even going into the next training session, I held on to it way too long. No one taught me how to not do that. Right? Nobody was recognizing that within me and giving me the understanding of what's happening, why it's not serving me, and so forth. And I think to some degree that's gotten a little bit better in the game.
Yeah.
A little bit. But again, the buzzword for the series, intentionality.
Yeah.
And making that a focus is critically important. And sometimes it comes natural. Like, again, my brother, I think it's something that comes more natural to him than it does for me. And that's great. It's actually an important characteristic for him to have. However, that doesn't mean it's not worth continuing to develop, because as he continues to grow and push his dreams and his desires, it's going to become more and more and more important. So he can't sit back on his laurels and say, this comes naturally to me, so I'm good.
Yeah.
Right? And so we intentionally talk about these things. And thankfully, he's open and receptive to them. And my job is to try and help where I can, give him something that I didn't have, like I was just describing. I didn't have somebody to help me understand those things. And so, again, it's just equally as important as the technical mastery of the ball.
Yeah.
And our resource allocation to either of those sides almost entirely leans to the technical side.
Did you find or have any examples of times where you were maybe hung up on a play during a game that impeded your progress for the rest of that match? Or not progress, performance is the word I was looking for.
Yeah. So I was young. It's a little bit different today. Like, there's like gradual goal sizes today. As you get older, the goals get progressively bigger.
Yeah.
when I was growing up playing, it was basically you went from like a small goal to like the biggest goal. And I remember a time, I think I must have been 11, maybe 12, but I think around 11. And I was playing center back. I'm very short for a center back, even back then, even though we were much smaller. And the ball was coming up, and it was a little bit over me. And I jumped for it. I came so close, it just skimmed off the top of my head, which was enough to put it over top of my goalkeeper in a much smaller net.
Yeah.
Now, had that same thing happened, 3 years later, he probably would have just jumped and caught it. Right. So it's a little bit to the size disparity, but you need to find the world as it is, not as you wish it was, and that's how things were then. And my decision making as an 11-year-old center back should be one that's a possibility, and if I don't get this right, that could happen. Or it's better to let it go over my head, turn and chase it, and hopefully the goalkeeper is there at the top of his box. And so I made the wrong decision. I remember that. I think I probably remember most decisions.
Yeah.
That went poorly back then. But the rest of that game, I played terribly because I knew that I had made a very costly mistake.
Now, was it analysis of what you did wrong that was impeding you, or maybe a feeling of shame or disappointment that you let your team down, that you let yourself down?
All of the above.
Yeah.
And then I took it as potential meaning that I'm not actually as good as I think I am. Because even at a young age, and this is tragic, by the way, but it's true, is all the things I was talking about Cristiano Ronaldo, you have those criticisms, not just from coaches, but opposing teams' coaches, parents on your team. And sorry, parents, but kids are attuned to this.
Yeah.
They know that if parents on your team think that you're not good enough, you can be as discreet as you think you are, but they know. And I had moments where I probably wasn't as good, and I knew that parents saw me through that lens. Thankfully, I continued to develop and so forth. But it was like this moment that affirmed all of those things. That it was like, it was just like, now I gave them evidence and maybe they're right. I could just imagine them looking over on the sidelines, even if they didn't say anything, they just kind of looked at each other like,
yeah, there he goes again.
Yeah. And then I thought, well, they're right, because the evidence suggested so. However, what I then realized, and this is often why I needed the next game, is because the next game I could perform well, and then now I had evidence of the contrary. But between that moment and whenever I got to change the evidence, what I was missing was big picture context. And that was something that I wish we were taught a whole lot more. I think is taught by few good coaches today, but maybe not as much as it should be. It's player development, especially at 11 years old. Who cares? It literally it doesn't matter. It's probably a good thing it happens, because you want it to happen at 11 so it doesn't happen at 17.
Yeah, make the big mistakes early.
Right. That's not how I saw it, because everyone then was obsessed with the outcomes. It wasn't about the journey, it was the destination. That game in the finite space we had to win that game. Then we had to win the league, the championship, and get invited to whatever travel tournament that we wanted to go to. And that was the priority. And so being intentional about what is the moment. What are we actually trying to get from this moment? Are we trying to develop, or are we trying to win a game?
Right.
And I think setting those expectations is something that's critically important for coaches, for parents, to help their child athlete understand, yeah, of course, we want you to have a great game and so forth. But also remember, in the big picture of this, our main focus is development. It's to learn. And we want you excited about learning. We want you to show up to training excited to train because it's an opportunity to learn.
Right.
15, 16, maybe not even 15, 16, 17. If you want to put a huge focus on winning games, fine. But at the same time, there's still a case that this is all about development. And that's where I think parents can intervene and help their child athlete even more to understand. And I can attest to this. I can tell every single athlete that even 15, 16, 17, the whole point is to learn. Everything we do in life, the point is to learn. And this brings me back to leadership. Leaders, parents, coaches, business leaders, the point is to learn. And I think we forget that. I see this maybe quite a lot in business, is we forget that the point is to learn, teach, guide, mentor, rather than critique. How did this person do this? Why? This makes no sense. And there's fringe cases, of course, where that's true. It's so egregious that you can't wrap your mind around it. But by and large, it's, okay, what did this person learn from this?
Right.
I think it was, I want to say Layla Hermosi. She spoke about somebody on her team that made some critical mistake. It was I don't know, tens of thousands of dollars mistake. And she told them, she shares this story. Did you learn from it? Yeah? Okay, great. Who cares? Now, if you think about it, as long as they've learned from it, now your responsibility as a coach, teacher, mentor, parent is to ensure that they learn whatever the lesson is they need from that mistake.
Right.
But once they do, as long as they've downloaded it and stored it for later, now, if you think of it through the lens of business and employment, well, now you have a much more intelligent person working for you in your team that's less likely to make that mistake for sure, and maybe any similar mistakes that they could otherwise make.
It also extends to the whole team as well. You're building a written history for the organization.
Right.
So great, if I can learn from my mistake, tremendous, but if everybody can also learn from that mistake too.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the reasons why, if I take this back to athletics, is that we have so many late developers in athletics that are succeeding more today than early developers. By virtue of being a late developer in the game, you have to make mistakes a lot earlier. You have to build a lot of the characteristics because you've had to deal with the rejection. You've had to deploy humility as a tool and bounce back from rejection and build that self-belief as exactly that self-belief, but still enough humility to continue to get better and better. You've had to do that in those earlier ages because you weren't good enough. Someone who's good enough right off the hop, where do they get that opportunity to learn all those things?
Right.
Maybe a little bit, but by the time they get to become professionals, they've been robbed of that opportunity because they've been at the pinnacle their whole life. I've seen this with players. I've experienced it myself. And it sounds counterintuitive, but if you're a parent athlete and your child is, second, third, fourth best, and they feel like they're behind, you feel like they're behind, they're not at the level of their peers, that's great. That's where you want them to be. I've shared that with a number of parents. This is amazing, where they seem concerned. No, this is so good. This is so good. Now, you have to extract everything from that experience and you have to learn from it and you have to help your child learn from it. But this is amazing. You can ask for a better position.
Right.
Great. Now they're going to learn all of the things that they need to in order to get there. I think for our generation, an interesting example, because I heard this often, was the student that excelled in high school struggled in post-secondary. Because it was so easy in high school for them that by the time they got to post-secondary, where it became that much more challenging, they hadn't built the work ethic, the humility, the things they needed to do to actually get good grades in that experience. And so they actually suffered more. Obviously, not having really gone through that experience, I can't state that as true one way or the other. But principally, that's kind of what I'm describing.
Yeah, it was certainly much more difficult in post-secondary. And part of the reason being is you're less babied. I was given a lot of grace in high school from some teachers who recognized that I had some potential but was maybe slacking. I got a lot of second chances, where in university, no. There were like a few cases there as well. And obviously professors are human beings with empathy and understanding, and you can have dialogue with them, of course, but I'm paying for this thing now, and it's on me. It's an elevated, more professional environment, I suppose.
Sure. And again, I think that's where there's some overlap in this as the metaphor, because the same thing is true, in soccer. At some point, yeah, it really does have to be about performance.
Right.
However, everything leading up to it, it's about the development and developing more than the technical mastery.
Sure.
Which is what so many people analyze. But the difference at the highest level, in most cases, isn't the technical mastery. Eventually you get to a point where most people have good first touch. They can distribute the ball, they can ping it. Maybe certain players in certain positions can be a bit faster than others, and so forth. Then it comes to what a lot of people describe as like performance mentality and the coaching that gets associated with that. And I think performance coaching and stuff like that is critical. But if you strip all that down, really what it is, it's the development of the characters and attributes in the same way you would have wanted to develop your technical ball mastery, your IQ, your distribution, all those things.
Glad that we landed here, because I want to discuss one of the scenarios that we have been juggling with, which is somebody who is reached an end state in one place and they're now moving into a new place. Whether that's moving from one environment to another because you're moving from, say, athletics to education, or from either of those two into the workforce, what can those individuals seek to gain through humility? How can they deploy that?
Well, I think it's hard because I think it's hard for most people, because if you're an athlete, you've built your identity around athletics, and you've built sort of like, of course you have a reputation which ties into your identity, but a lot of meaning and purpose around that. That's why you've pushed so hard towards that thing. So you lose some of those things. But you've had to have humble experiences like we just described. Now, when you're shifting into a new domain, you're starting from scratch. And so that's going to feel a whole lot different. It's going to hurt your ego without question, because you went as like Daniel, the soccer player, towards the end, in most rooms or pitches, I knew that I had a very high level of competence when I showed up. And now I'm showing up to this place where I have almost no competence. And so it's worth remembering, one, what got you there, and two, what's required, again, to get you to that level of competence. So one being, of course, humility, because I have to tuck my ego away. And really peel apart those experiences, okay, so I need humility. Where did I last deploy humility as a tool? Okay, it was feedback. Yes, I remember when the coach said that, and I know I'm good enough. And he said that, okay, but I did have to look. And so, okay, so now I've sort of recalled this moment, and now I have to remember, okay, this is what it's going to require of me to achieve this next level of competence in this other area. And it might be harder, for sure, because there's more that you're contending with. Like I said, a stripped identity, maybe a bit of a loss of meaning and purpose, and now you're just going to a job to do a job because it's entry level rather than, your career. But you still have to show up and you still have to learn, otherwise you're not going to get paid, and there's some necessity there and all of that kind of stuff. But if you don't, then you'll continue to fail over and over again. And that jump is almost akin to being like, you're in grade 8, you're the king of the school, and then you show up to grade 9.
Sure.
And you're nobody. If I was to use an example that most people can probably understand, it's just probably to a much greater level, because you've probably been at a level of competence for a much longer period of time, whether it's through career and having to do a career transition, whether it's you're going to lose your career because of AI and now you have to go find something else, athletics, military, first responder, whatever that next jump is, and you're starting from scratch.
One of the last things that I explored in my little thought experiment before this was, again, a utilitarian one, utilizing humility as a tool for social leverage, particularly in the context of domain transfer. In that, if you approach a new environment with humility, you can reduce defensive posturing of those who are already experts within the field, who are supposed to be the ones you're interfacing with.
Sure.
Ultimately, what it distills down to is that if you position yourself as someone willing to learn, then you invite information. People are more likely to help you.
Yes.
In that, an openness to new ideas, it doesn't signal dominance to the people who are teaching you. I can't say I have a load of experience dealing with people who are unwilling to train or teach me or unveil their trade secrets, for instance. I think I've been very lucky in that sense. But I've heard a lot about the new overconfident, arrogant guy not doing so well because they made enemies rather quickly.
Sure. I mean, those types of personalities are always going to exist, I think. But I think this is where, as you've described it as a tool, becomes really important. So looking at it as a tool makes it more accessible, I think, to everyone. Somebody that's not into, philosophy or looking at the meaning of life or looking for some kind of awakening, new way of thinking, whatever anyone's purpose is for showing up. If it's just a tool for somebody who just wants to do better simply at a job. And so hopefully that resonates with that type of a person. And I say that to say because that mentality has, I don't think, ever served anybody. And when you show up somewhere for the very first time, or the second time, third time, it's important. Again, if you think about using it as a tool for an outcome, your outcome is you want to learn. If you want to do well at a job, you need to learn. If you want to do well at anything, you need to learn. And to your point, good luck trying to get somebody to help you.
Right.
If you sort of put on this notion of competence that you've not yet deserved, then, if I was to be coaching you and that was the case, I'd probably think to myself, okay, well, you know everything. That's fine. Go do it then.
Right. Yeah. Like I'll spend my effort elsewhere.
Right. Because, you're asking somebody to give something that they have to you.
Sure.
And you have to show up willing to give as well. You're going to share your knowledge. I'm going to give you my time and attention. Both is worth something. And if I show up thinking, I don't really want to give you my time and attention because I already know whatever it is that you have to say, you're going to see that. And so I'm then effectively telling you, and this kind of bleeds into the communication chapter, because this is a form of communication. I'm communicating to you that I don't value what you have to share with me.
Correct.
I've told you that, almost in plain English. Whether you see that or not, it's true. Right. That's what it is. Now, maybe you don't intend to be saying that, and that it's coming off that way. That's where we can use language to help clarify our intent behind things. But recognizing that how you move, how you hold yourself, how your facial expressions are, all of these things are forms of communication.
Sure.
And if you posture in that way and then maybe quickly dismiss something and present this form of competence early, then you've effectively communicated that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an individual could be the top of the top in their field, but unless their field is understanding and connecting with other human beings, they're going to have a hard time if they're arrogant within that space.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, regardless of expertise, when you are transferring between domains, first and foremost, you need to learn about the people you're working with.
Yes.
So you can connect with them, learn how to work with them, what their strengths are compared to yours. Try to find some synergy within that team and where you fit. Unless your job is to go sit in the corner and pump out product based on your specialty, which congrats if that's what your job is, you're gonna have a bad time if you can't genuinely connect with others.
And then you won't achieve the outcome that you've desired, which is employment, maybe promotion, monetary increase, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And I think this actual notion is going to be harder. This is one of the things I anticipate with, all things AI coming downstream, is there's a lot of talk about job loss at scale. And so one of my hopes is that we can get this right in how we're thinking about transferable everything, and through offering this up, maybe help anyone that's going to experience that. Because, my major life transitions that were deeply challenging, and when I saw other people go through them, they were at certain points in our career, and to some degree expected for at least some of us. At least on the athletic side it was. Maybe not so much on the military side for me, but on the athletic side, there is an expectation that it is going to come to an end. You have to know that. You're not managing your expectations well. And although that's true professionally for most people, 20 years into a career that they're doing really well at, that's going to be really hard for people to potentially lose that job. And so my fear is less about what are they going to do economically, but my greatest fear is how will they be able to overcome that? Because so many of us have built meaning and purpose within our jobs, maybe by necessity, because it's deploying meaning and purpose into our job was the fuel that maybe allowed us to succeed. I've heard a lot of criticism about people that do that. They said well, your job can't be the place for meaning and purpose. You need to look elsewhere. It's like, okay, that's easy to say. But if you're trying to excel at something, if you're trying to get a promotion to earn more money for your family, it might be your family ultimately, but you have to deploy some meaning and purpose into your job. And so now you've done that and it's there, and the potential that it's going to be taken from you. And not just one person or a couple people, like millions of people. And so that's kind of one of my biggest worries is, will they be prepared? Not just are they going to get a job replacement,
Right.
because, you know, that's a little bit beyond me. But even if they do get a job replacement, there's a huge loss that they're going to experience. And have they been given the tools to transcend that loss of meaning, of purpose, of identity, of competence? Maybe they get a job, even if they made the same amount of money. Maybe they don't see progression. They don't enjoy it, so they don't have that fulfillment. Maybe they feel like it's too late in their career to actually excel. And so their future feels like it's been stripped from them, not just the moment or that particular job. They no longer see themselves excelling at something. And that in of itself can be a terrible, destructive feeling. And the whole point is that even if you were deploying meaning and purpose into your work and into your job, you can still take that back and redeploy it somewhere else with all of the same characteristics and attributes and still be highly competent and still excel. So there's a bit of a twofold there, because that is true, but also the employer has to be able to recognize that and accept that. And so I'm kind of interested in both of those things. Is, can employers learn to welcome career transitioners? And how well will people be able to make the transition into a completely new career, new domain, and still have that same level of trajectory?
Right.
Because I think both can be beautiful beneficiaries of one another. It would be great for a business to be able to welcome someone with these phenomenal attributes, different experience, that actually might lend a new lens to look at things in their business in a new way. And they could benefit from that greatly. And of course, same with the other person. All of a sudden becoming a huge contributor to a business might be the thing that you need in that transition to do it successfully. It's kind of a tough way to close, but closing on something that's a little bit cynical, doom and gloom, or seemingly so, talking about AI and its disruption. But really, the ultimate message that I want to leave everybody with is hope. That there is hope to get through these transitions. And I say that because, hopefully there's people listening and they think, well, yeah, obviously there is. And that's great. Unfortunately, statistically, from athletics, military transitions, we know the data and we know the challenges for a variety of reasons that those transitions are so challenging. And so for those people that can't see it, or maybe they're not there yet, there's absolutely hope. And I truly believe it lies within the characteristics, the virtues that you develop. That becomes the foundation for everything that's next, which means anything is then possible.
Sure.
And when you think about that, that's where kind of hope begins in yourself. And so for anyone that might be thinking that, I just can't see it, I can't imagine it, suspend your disbelief, extend some trust, and be willing to put in the work. But like I said, I wanted to end on hope, because it does exist. There is a light at the end of the tunnel in all things, in all scenarios. And beyond that, I'm really grateful for everyone who shared their time with us, who's willing to listen. And I look forward to continuing to share more. Thank you.
And as Kendrick would say, be humble.
Hey.